Greetings comic lovers, and welcome back to Casually Comics, the channel where we chat all things comics, from reviews of comics new and old, to history, to anecdotes, to really wherever our whims take us. I'm Sasha, and I can't find my glasses, so we're rolling without them tonight. And we're going to be talking about Jason Todd. We're going to be untangling a web of fandom history, some of which people are aware of, but maybe not potentially how we got there. We're going to be talking about Jason Todd's death, but specifically what led up to it. Why exactly did fans hate him so much that they felt he had to die? And get ready for there to be a lot of quotes, because make no mistake, fans really did hate him. It's a bit hard for modern readers to conceive of, but this was a whole thing. Get ready for history. If you're always down to untangle some history, hit that like button. Okay, now let's get back to basics and unpack this. Yes, we're filming at night, because what better time is there to discuss child murder? Because that's what this was. Jason Todd is the second Robin and is known to most as the Robin with the bad boy attitude, but he didn't start off that way. Now, some wouldn't even recognize the first iteration of Jason. Meet Ginger Jason, Jason Todd. Look at him with his little red locks. Yep, red hair Jason is a thing. If you thought he had red hair, you're not crazy. Actually, this is why during Morrison's run it was red again, but it was creepy at that point. We'll get to that a bit later. For now, let's go even further back to why they had to create Jason in the first place. Something unique was happening at the time, a rarity in comics. A character was growing up, and that character was Dick Grayson, the first Robin. He was getting to the point where he was breaking out on his own, and fans were liking it. They were down for solo adventures with Robin, especially after the much celebrated New Teen Titans run began, a run that would see Dick transformed into Nightwing. This run began in 1980. So it was becoming clear that Dick couldn't be Robin forever, but it had been established pretty much since Batman's inception that he had a Robin, that it was a dynamic duo, that there was a foil there, someone for him to bounce ideas off of, have a good time with, have angst with, and care for. So it was thought that a new Robin was needed. So enter Jason Todd. He appeared for the first time in 1983 in Batman number 357, and then appeared fully with a proper introduction in Detective Comics number 525. And thusly we are introduced to the first factor that would play a big part in just 2 years. You were supposed to read both of these books in tandem, and it felt that way. They were definitely written that way. Plot points would start in one and then be continued in another. For example, Dick sends Jason's parents on a mission in one book, but the next issue Jason is already training with Batman and he's his ward. So you're like, what happened? Well, his parents died in the other comic. So Jason Todd was a member of a circus family, the Flying Todds. Is this sounding familiar? Yeah, initially Jason was pretty much just a clone of Dick, but with red hair. He would later dye his hair black when he wanted to become Robin. This was because he wanted there to be continuity between the Robins. He didn't want villains knowing that there was more than one. It was actually quite clever. He thought ahead. Later, Grant Morrison would retcon this to Batman forcing Jason to dye his hair. Because why not? Why have something normal when you can have something really creepy that makes it seem like Bruce has a fetish? Thank you. Unnecessary retcon was unnecessary. So for those who read that Morrison run and were like, why is Jason ginger? This is why. His first origin did have red hair. But that retcon was unnecessary because later Jason was going to turn out to have dark hair anyway. Now, the first reception to Jason was lukewarm, with a hint of step off of Dick Grayson's turf. But this transition was eased thanks to panels of Jason being given his blessing by Dick, and the fact that Jason was very careful to try and be respectful. Also, Bruce talked to him about not stealing somebody else's identity. So Jason had actually taken on another costume and was trying to come up with another name before Dick came and said, it's okay, I have my own life now, you can have the Robin mantle, which went a long way with a lot of fans. But at the same time was a bit of a contradiction to what had been going on with Bruce and Dick up until that point, which was very much the disintegration of their relationship. However, many fans like this better because who wants to see the dynamic duo fight? Me, just a little bit. Angst. Sprinkle it. Okay, so some of you may be saying, none of this sounds particularly like I need to pick up the phone and call to vote on whether Jason dies or not. And you're right. Jason owes a lot of his death to his second origin, which is the result of Crisis on Infinite Earths. Crisis on Infinite Earths was a 1985 major DC-wide event. It was meant to clean up the DC multiverse and condense it all into one universe. As you can see, that has since been retconned away, and now there's a multiverse on top of another one. However, at this time, back in the 80s, the multiverses, there was a lot of them, and it was getting a bit convoluted. They were housing different characters, different versions on different Earths, and different companies' characters that DC had acquired over over time, and they would cross over, and sometimes you weren't sure which version of a character you were dealing with, especially if you were new to comics. So this event was a way to fold everything in and hopefully make it concise and accessible. But as with most giant company-wide reboots, there were still some loose ends and some things got more confusing, and one of those things was Jason. Since the reception to Jason had been so lukewarm, the company decided this was the perfect time to relaunch him, to reboot him, and try again, essentially. So Jason was introduced again with a brand new origin in Batman 408 and 409 in 1987, meaning that there were only 4 years between his first and second origin. Now, this is the version of Jason that most people are familiar with or remember. The already dark-haired Jason who was caught stealing the wheels off the Batmobile and making Batman laugh, which is terrifying. By the end of it, impressed by his spunk, Jason adopts this boy and decides that he will be the new Robin. Cliff notes, but yeah, that's all you need to know really. Now, some of you may be saying, that sounds interesting. He's not a Dick Grayson clone anymore, so what's the problem? I'm saying what's the problem a lot in this video. What's the problem? While pre-Crisis Jason had been embraced by Dick, post-Crisis Jason was not. In fact, Dick is benched/fired really from being Robin because he gets shot by the Joker at the issue's start. And Bruce is all, no, it's dangerous and I love you, but I can't say that. And Dick is like, fine, then I'm gonna move to a city that's about 2 hours away and you're gonna regret this. Please stop me and don't let me leave. And Bruce is like, okay, see you later, I'm gonna go get a new Robin, bye. So by the end of this 2-part story, we have a new Robin. And Robin at this point wasn't just a code name, it was something special to Dick. So that was a bit of an extra slap across the face. Dick was very much a favorite character, and so to show him being hurt like that was something that many people couldn't abide. It got even worse because Dick would later confront Bruce as Nightwing, saying that he had taken his home away from him, that his role had been usurped, and that this wasn't what he had wanted, at least not like that. None of this made people like Jason. Dennis O'Neil, who took over as Batman editor in 1986, would later talk about a lot of what was going on. So I've got receipts, I got quotes, get ready. The fans did hate him. I don't know if it was fan craziness, maybe they saw him as usurping Dick Grayson's position. Some of the mail response indicated that this was at least on some people's minds. Although really, what can you expect? You have Dick get shot, be benched, be upset about not being Robin, and then by the end of the 2 issues he's been replaced, the very thing he was worried about? Yeah, I don't know how else fans would have reacted, really. It's not Jason's fault though, really, it's more the writer's fault. Also, there was a bit of confusion because Crisis didn't mean that comics ended or stopped being published. So there was a tiny bit of overlap between Circus Jason and Street Kid Jason. So sometimes you could be reading a comic and just have a moment where it was like,
is this dyed hair Jason or natural dark hair Jason?
And post-Crisis Jason tended to be angrier than the pre-Crisis version, who was so much a carbon copy of Dick that sometimes you couldn't even tell that it wasn't Dick until someone said Jason's name. A great example of this is a 1985 Superman story, The Man Who Has Everything, or rather, For the Man Who Has Everything. Superman doesn't have everything. This happened to me while I read this story. I had no idea that it wasn't Dick until someone was like, hey Jason, I was like, oh. That's Jason. Also, he was wearing shorts in the Arctic. However, it's quite the contrast to go from that Jason to a Jason who nearly beats Two-Face to death. That's a lot of edge, especially for that time period. There were some Jason arcs that were pretty controversial and left some fans wondering whether the writers were going too far. Those actually play a lot better today in retrospect, which I'll get to in a minute. So this meant that DC was sitting around publishing Batman books with a Robin character that it appeared wasn't too popular. And then the perfect storm hit. Dennis O'Neil was looking to try and find a way to build up audience engagement, to get more people reading and buying Batman, and he had an idea. What if they had a vote? What if the readers could determine the outcome of something in the story? So he went to then DC Comics president Jenette Kahn and pitched it, and she liked it. However, they decided that it couldn't just be any lame vote. It couldn't be what Bruce had for breakfast, or what he was going to wear, what car he was going to drive. No, it had to have stakes, teeth, a crowbar. So they settled on a death. And I quote, "The logical candidate was Jason, because we had reason to believe that he wasn't that popular anyway. It was a big enough stunt that we couldn't do it with a minor character." Now, many will then focus on the vote aspect, whether that was fair or not, whether it's a good business practice, but we're gonna leave that aside to talk about Jason, but please do leave your feelings down below. And so it was that you, the reader, could call in and decide whether Jason Todd lived or died. It would come out later that the margin between the votes was 72. That slim. 5,343 votes to 5,271. So in total, there were only 10,614 votes that determined Jason's fate. On top of that, it would come out later that it was highly likely that hundreds of the votes came from one person who had set their computer to redial. O'Neill would later state when talking about all this, "I heard it was one guy who programmed his computer to dial the thumbs down number every 90 seconds for 8 hours who made the difference." So hundreds of votes from one single Todd hater. She wasn't that bad. I mean, I wasn't there, so I can't experience the full Jason hate, but don't mess with the Dick Grayson revenge squad. DC was serious about this decision too. They really did publish both endings. If you get the collected editions of the A Death in the Family story arc, then you can see that there really are these two covers. They were gonna stand by this, so integrity? Yay, I guess. Here's the thing. They killed Jason, and then there was instant backlash. It looked like Jason hadn't been as unpopular as they thought he was. People were not here for this, not only because it was the killing of a child, essentially, but because it was the killing of a symbol. Robin was always a symbol of hope, of joy in Batman's life and in that universe, even when he was Jason. So to have him killed, especially so brutally, which was him being beaten with a crowbar and then the building he was in exploding, it was quite a lot of a lot. Well, for some, they said it was actually the most devastating thing they had ever seen in comics. In fact, funnily enough, one of the people who would critique this was Frank Miller, who would go on to be one of the people who launched the Dark Age with The Dark Knight Returns. He stated, "To me, the whole killing of Robin thing was probably the ugliest thing I've seen in comics and the most cynical." But O'Neill would stand by it, at least at the time, though he now regrets it. He stated, "It would be a really sleazy stunt to bring him back." And yeah, really when you think about it, they were in between a rock and a hard place, because if they turned around and went, "Oh, you don't like child death? Well, here's Jason," then it would have made the whole thing seem even tackier. Instead, what they did was they doubled down. They turned this into a source of pathos for Batman and Bruce for years. However, this didn't happen right away. For a while, they tried to bury Jason, figuratively, and just not talk about him. In fact, he dies in Batman, but he isn't mentioned again in Detective Comics, the fact that he's dead, for 11 months. What they would also do was turn this into a lesson for how they would introduce the third Robin, Tim Drake. And one of those things was to instantly build up a relationship with Dick Grayson, because they learned that if Dick didn't like you, it wasn't happening. Just pack your bags, get out. Go to a building and sit there and hold a crowbar. The funny thing is, Jason is a decently popular character now, so it can be hard for some newer readers to get into the mindset of, okay, why did people hate him? Now, Jason's resurrection had more to do with just the fact that people feel that this vote was unfair, which is very much a heavy sentiment in what happened. So some did want him to come back and get his due. Now, whether he's gotten it is another question. So remember when I said that post-crisis Jason plays better in retrospect? Here's why. For newer readers, Dick is established as Nightwing. There's no question about him being Robin anymore. He is Nightwing, and Jason is the second Robin. Those are just facts at this point. So there's not that push and pull or feeling of usurpation like there was in the past. Also, looking back and seeing the contrast between the two characters is viewed as a positive. Why have a carbon copy of a character when you can have something different and tell a different story? So now when people look back on Jason, they see the wasted potential, and especially because so much pathos was built up for years about angst about Jason, it made him seem more intriguing. So in a funny way, the death that happened because it looked like he was unpopular is one of the things that ultimately led to him being popular. All in all, Jason's time as Robin was brief, only 5 years. Barely anything, especially in the comic timeline. Time moves very differently in there. And yet, the impact he left until he was resurrected was so mighty. I'll tell you how he was resurrected another day. I don't want to scare you off right now. So yeah, that's why fans used to hate Jason. I'm sure some still do. If you weren't aware of what was going on in that time period, I hope you were somewhat enlightened. Also, do you want to hear more about Jason, his first origin, his second origin, his death, his resurrection? Let me know. Ooh, we should have a vote. And then depending on what wins, I can take my A Death in the Family copy and beat it with a crowbar and then blow it up. I'm not gonna do that. Please just leave a comment. I just want to talk more about Jason. Thanks so much for watching Casually Comics. Please do all of the YouTube things. Like, share, subscribe, hit that bell notification so that you never miss a vid. I'm Sasha, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.